So we might get started, Liz.
Yeah, that's fine.
I just want to acknowledge that I'm on the lands of the Kumameri people, part of the Yugambeh language group, otherwise known as the Gold Coast. And I'm Sam. I'm the coordinator of the Glossy Black Conservancy and also the coordinator of the National Recovery Plan for the Southeast and Glossy Black-Cockatoo. I'm not an ecologist. I'm a communication and engagement specialist. And for those of you who don't know about the Conservancy, I think most of you do, we're a very tiny organisation. So the coordinator's role is 1 day a week shared between two of us. We do end up working more than 1 day a week, but it's a very lightly resourced organisation, predominantly funded through membership levies that local governments and others pay. Liz has been a driving force behind the Glossy Black Conservancy for a really long time. She was involved in getting it off the ground, nearly 20 years ago. Did the original habitat mapping for Southeast Queensland along with Shannon, who Liz will introduce shortly, is an ecological consultant herself, has worked with the regional NRM organisation for Southeast Queensland, Healthy Land and Water, and has also volunteered with a number of grassroots community groups and also sits on the Gondwana World Heritage Committee. Liz, is that right? Yes?
Yeah, that's right. Yep.
Okay, that's great. Well, yes, so couldn't find Liz's bio, so I'll try my hand. So this project that we're presenting on has actually been funded through WIRES, another organisation that runs on very minimal funding. We were lucky enough to receive a modest grant to update this habitat mapping for Southeast Queensland. We were also lucky that both Liz and Shannon, who did the original habitat mapping, are now freelancing, and we're happy to take on that project on behalf of the Conservancy. So I will be here in the background for this workshop. As I said, it's being recorded. Encourage you to share the link when we get it out next week to anybody who would like to understand this process, and to reach out to any of us if you have questions. So over to you, Liz, and nice to see you all online.
Thanks, Sam, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I am joining you from the Yagara people and Turrbal people in Western Brisbane, not the landscape that's shown behind me. Unfortunately, that's actually down in Canberra. This is a beautiful box-gum grassy woodland behind me. As Sam's given you a bit of introduction to myself, Shannon and I worked together for quite some years with Healthy Land and Water and the regional NRM organisation for Southeast Queensland, and did the original habitat mapping for Glossy's then, and it's great to collaborate with Shannon again today, this year, I guess, to make the most of his GIS expertise. As Sam said, this project is funded by WIRES, and I just need to share my screen with you guys too, don't I, at some point. Funded by WIRES, a Pat Connors Avian Grant we were successful in getting, which has enabled us to update this mapping from the 2016 model to current day. And it's still a draft in progress, just put that out there. So any feedback that you want to give us is more than welcome. Questions are also more than welcome. I'll probably put a bit of a caveat. This is the mapping that we're doing. I'm going to explain it in the broadest sense and overarching sort of planning and legislative framework that it fits into in Queensland. I'm not a lawyer or anything like that, so I may get things not exactly right, but I should be able to give you a good sense of how it works in Queensland. And the aim of today is to try and advocate to you for how we can extend that mapping both within Queensland and also potentially beyond that. And share with you how it has worked and some of the hiccups we've had with the habitat mapping as it's applied in Southeast Queensland. Anyway, I will move on. So welcome and thank you for joining us. There we go. So a bit of background. So we mentioned it a couple of times. Back in 2016, we finalised the habitat mapping for glossies across the SEQ bioregion. That work was supported by the Australian government funding through to the regional group, SEQ catchments at the time. It's now known as Healthy Land and Water. We basically wanted to update this mapping now because it has been 10 years. We know that the population size is still considered to be decreasing. The area of occupancy is considered to be decreasing. Southeastern Glossy Black-Cockatoo were listed as nationally vulnerable in 2022, and there's been a lot of work done in data collection and research in the last 10 years. There's been an enormous growth and expansion of citizen science programs, collecting some really amazing data on glossies, including things that the Conservancies run, partnership with bird life, such as the Great Glossy Clout. We've got the Glossy Squad working in New South Wales as well, and lots of people submitting data on Glossy Black-Cockatoo. So lots of data and lots of research. There's a lot of research also funded following the fires in 2019, 2020 that has advanced our knowledge of what's going on for glossies. Garnett et al. Reckon glossies are actually facing the most threats of any threatened bird in Australia. So they're significantly under threat. We've got to do a lot more for them. And again, thanks to WIRES for providing the funding for this project to take place. So some of the features of the 2016 mapping, you can see on the screen there, I've showing you the front cover, what it looks like. This is all available publicly, so you can jump onto ResearchGate. Shannon might be able to throw the link in there if you're after that. That document basically has the map in it, has this table in it. What we did back in 2016 is we used high precision citizen science data on birds and feed tree records to intersect that over the regional ecosystem mapping that we're very fortunate to have here in Queensland, and identify which regional ecosystems we had those high precision records. High precision being records collected post 1990 and with a 500-meter precision accuracy on them. Once we had a draft set of regional ecosystem identified by those high precision records, we then engaged our expert panel who worked with us to filter that out where we might have had records that might have been picking up an adjoining regional ecosystem, or do further QA on the records as well. So we came up with a list of regional ecosystems that are known or considered high likelihood of Glossy Black-Cockatoo occurring in them. We then distinguished under the state mapping process for getting information through into essential habitat, and I'll go into that in a little bit more, confidence on those regional ecosystems. And the confidence was really based on evidence of presence. So you can see on the screen there, those tables, we've got a habitat value column. In that, we've got EHK, that's essential habitat known, as it was called back then. It's kind of changed its name now. But a high confidence of essential habitat known is when you have a regional ecosystem less than 500 meters proximity to a high precision record. And those regional ecosystems are already identified as those potentially containing known feed tree species. And then, as you can see in that table, less confidence for essential habitat known. That medium confidence is when those regional ecosystems are further away from a high precision record, and then it drops out into essential habitat possible, that's the EHP, depending on distance from a known record. So the regional ecosystems or the vegetation communities could be pretty much the same, classified the same, but they're just further away from a high precision record. So less confidence, even though it's highly likely that the feed trees that glossies rely on are in those. We did a separate process for nesting habitat. Given how difficult it is in Southeast Queensland, and I think most of mainland Australia, to be able to predict where glossies may be nesting, all we did there was where we have a high precision nesting record, as we buffered that by 100 meters and considered that anything and everything in that 1,000-meter buffer is important for glossies. So whether that's remnant vegetation, whether that's large trees, whether that's regrowth, whether it's cleared paddock, whatever it is, glossies have chosen it, so that's important. So all of that area was identified as being also essential habitat on that core habitat category. So the two areas coloured pink in those on the screenshots there are the core habitats. And then confidence based on proximity, nesting overlays, those 1,000 meters buffered points. We considered whether general habitat was likely for glossies at the time and disregarded that one, considering that it was either their essential habitat of known or potential, or there's no such thing as general habitat. It was either really important or not used at all. We made, we put that information on core habitats through to the state government for consideration as essential habitat under the Queensland Vegetation Management Act 1999, or the VMA. And it was fortunately approved. And since then, those core habitats are considered matters of state environment significance through the regulated vegetation and also through as wildlife habitat. The non-core mapping, or the mapping that we did that didn't come up as high confidence, we made that available generally to our conservancy partners and local governments across Southeast Queensland, so that they could take it into consideration when undertaking their planning processes, their community engagement processes, and the like. So the map there shows what that mapping actually looks like. So we've got the darkest purple areas are the essential habitat known high confidence. That's the core habitat, core foraging habitats that went through. You can't really see any of the nesting habitats. Their dots are too small to show up on that scale of map. For those of you who aren't familiar, we've got, obviously that map is showing the border between Queensland and New South Wales at the bottom, and then it goes up as far as, I think it's Gladstone up in the north. So it's the SEQ bioregion, but just the Queensland section. And the colours there, so dark purple is the core habitat, and then as we move out from that, the lighter purple is medium confidence, and then the different shades of green are high confidence possible habitat and medium confidence possible habitat. So how the habitat mapping works in Queensland to support species conservation and recovery, the Queensland Government MSES, and Matters of State Environment Significant Wildlife Habitat Mapping Options, put out, there's a methodology paper that's referred to on the slide there. They have 3 preferred options for undertaking wildlife habitat mapping. That is the peer or expert reviewed and approved habitat suitability model, or HSM. That's what we did in 2016, and that's what we've done again. Their second option is a habitat map that's approved or accepted by the relevant government authority. So this could be areas where, for example, we don't actually have remnant vegetation maps, such as our foreshore areas, which could be important for shorebird roosts or turtle nesting. And then the last resort is where we don't have a habitat model and we don't have those additional accepted habitat maps, but we're just using buffered points. So most species in Queensland, their habitat is mapped through a buffered point approach, high precision record buffered by 1,000 metres. And outside of the SEQ bioregion, that is the approach that's taken for glossies in Queensland. So we're lucky to have this habitat suitability model for the bioregion, but outside of that, it is again those buffered points. The habitat suitability models identify the core and non-core habitats, both of which can be used in non-statutory processes such as the biodiversity planning assessments and aquatic conservation assessments that are undertaken in Queensland. But it's only the core habitat that gets included to as either a matter of state environment significance for wildlife habitat, or under the Vegetation Management Act as the regulated vegetation or essential habitat. Where we're at currently, only 23 of nearly, over 1,300 threatened or near threatened species in Queensland have had habitat suitability models developed. And yeah, that's not many anyway. So what we're doing today, I guess, is a part of this webinar series is basically just trying to advocate for the role that habitat mapping can have in trying to better protect and avoid impacts to threatened species habitats. So yeah, outside SEQ, buffered points, and that's only used for nesting, roosting or feeding records, because obviously glossies are a fairly mobile species, and just a record of them flying over isn't sufficient to be able to map that habitat as being important for their conservation. So there's 2 mechanisms that habitats are considered matters of state environmental significance. It can be under the state planning policy as a wildlife habitat, or under the offsets regulation. I've put in there some of the definitions of what core habitat are that I've been talking about, and non-core habitat. Basically, do we have evidence of reason or probability that the habitat is used by the species, or don't we? In Queensland, we can't, and I think this is similarly around Australia, you can't have, in Queensland, you can't have matters of state environment significance overlapping with matters of local environment significance. And NES also comes into play there, but I believe the Common Conservation Assessment methodology means that they're often overlapping in that space. And I know we've got some people here who work at the national level, so I'd love to hear more from you on whether I've got that right or wrong. Basically, also that we can have a matter of stated environment significance under the state planning policy is not necessarily the same as a matter of state environment significance under the Queensland offsets regulation. So there's some technicalities in all of that that we need to be mindful of when applying the mapping in terms of how we can use it and how it gets enforced or regulated. So that diagram back there is just basically a cut and paste out of the mixed method habitat suitability modelling methodology put together by the Queensland government. You can look for that. It is available publicly to see how they run the method and the different rules that they suggest as just a guidance for developing habitat models. With Glossies, we developed our habitat model prior to the release of this document and the release of this methodology. So our intent is to continue on with how we've undertaken that for the 2025 update. And we have actually had feedback from researchers that there's really good alignment between those known and predicted habitats or potential habitats in the old mapping, or the current mapping, I should say, compared to where actually birds are being sighted. So the key question for us was, did the mapping that we did into 2016 actually reduce habitat loss for glossies? I'm going to have to be honest and say not entirely sure on this one. We do know what we identified as the extent of remnant habitats for glossies back in 2016, which is sort of 1.6 million hectares across the SEQ bioregion, approximately 26%. Not me, Shannon, did all the analysis of looking at the statewide land and trees survey program to look at the clearing polygons and identify what habitat we've lost since then. And we found that it has reduced by, over 9,500 hectares, so 9,680 hectares since 2016. Within that amount, we consider that 1,773 hectares of that was within those core habitat categories. So theoretically, matters of state environment significance and protected as such, but we've still lost nearly 2,000 hectares. And non-core habitat loss was closer to 8,000 hectares across the bioregion. That analysis also found that the habitat loss wasn't in a couple of big patches, but across 4,377 patches of habitat that were impacted in some way or form. Most of that loss seems to have taken place in the northern part of the Southeast Queensland bioregion, and most seems to be associated with thinning and forestry activities with a bit of grazing. SLATs also shows impacts of other things like natural disasters. So we know that there was a drought that led up to the 2019-2020 wildfires, and the impacts of both of those natural disasters is likely reflected in the SLATs polygons as well. Other things to consider, SEQ is currently going through the bioregional pilot planning process. So we're hoping this mapping will be able to feed into that. Past mapping for the SEQ region, statutory planning called Shaping SEQ, there's about 18,800 hectares of glossy habitat within what's considered the urban footprint, which doesn't provide huge amounts of protection for habitat. And there's about nearly 4,000 hectares of that within the rural living area, which obviously provides a little bit more leniency for protection of trees, particularly large trees with hollows or feeding trees. Some of the activities identified by the SLATs analysis that have led to the greatest loss of glossy habitat across the SEQ bioregion is that clearing to pasture. Things like internal property roads, things like fire breaks and fences, even golf courses somehow fit into that one clearing. We've also got forestry, removal of vegetation for forestry and loss of crown clover in a number of different categories there, as well as cropping, infrastructure, roads and easements and runways and things like that. Bit of mining, urban development, and obviously there was some mapping corrections and previously missed clearing that was included in that analysis. So a bit more on that. This is the maps that Shannon's prepared for us of where that loss has occurred. So on the left, we've got the northern part of the SEQ bioregion, and on the right, we've got the southern part. And as you can see there, the red colours on that map are where we've had some form of loss since 2016. The blue areas is where our mapping had remnant glossy black-cockatoo habitat that no longer seems to exist. The dark purple is the same color, and the light purple and the green is the same colors as we saw on this previous map. So that's our core habitats in the dark purple, non-core, high confidence in that lighter color, and then the green area shows the non-core habitats that we've got less confidence on. So lots of scattered patches. There's only probably a couple of areas where we've got a little bit of chunky blue going on, but most of those areas is lots and lots of tiny cumulative impacts. So just because we're not sure when we run these webinars who we've got in the room and the knowledge of glossies, this is a snapshot of what do we need for glossies. So we know with their habitats on, but basically to achieve their recovery, we need to prevent the loss of the known and potential foraging habitats and trees. So glossies will feed in forests, but they will also feed in isolated trees in parks. But generally needing a lot more trees than are provided by a park. We need to prevent the loss of known nesting and drinking sites. Being a seed eater, water is extraordinarily important to glossies. They need to drink every single day, and particularly in the breeding season, proximity of water to nesting sites is very important for the male to be able to support the female while she's incubating eggs and looking after young in the hollow. We need to prevent the loss of hollow-bearing trees that are more than 40 centimetres in diameter. The previous mapping, we identified that important trees that are important to glossies for nesting are generally from about 70 centimetres DBH, but we do know now that we've got records of glossies nesting in smaller trees, and we also need to take a precautionary approach to protect those slightly smaller DBH trees to ensure they get to those larger sizes. And to protect, we need to protect the regrowth and recovering habitats to achieve remnant status. If we've lost, 9,500 hectares of remnant habitat containing feed trees for a species that's vulnerable, then we need to be doing a lot more to protect those habitats and allow that recovery. Because if we want a declining species to recover, we need to provide more of what it needs, not less of not its weeds. I know I'm saying the obvious stuff, but we need to provide it the opportunity to recover for its population growth to occur. And that means providing more food, providing more nesting sites, and reducing the other threats to glossies. So it's a very simple maths. If it costs us only $10,000 a hectare to replant a she oak forest that's suitable for glossies to feed in, we would need $968 million to do that replanting to replace the 9,680 hectares that we have lost. That's without maintenance. It's also without considering that it takes nearly 10 years for a she oak to bear fruit so that it's suitable for a glossy black cockatoo. So they've got to wait 10 years to have that replacement food once it's lost as well. We'll feed on a tree as young as 5 years, but it doesn't provide them the best food resources. Similarly, growing a tree to replace a nest hollow that's been lost, it could take decades for the smaller DBH, depending on how fast the tree grows and the things that cause hollows, but it could take hundreds of years to get to those larger tree sizes. And we know there is no known use of artificial nest hollows by wild Southeast glossies on the mainland Australia. We know that the kangaroo island birds use artificial nest hollows. No evidence that glossies on the mainland will use nesting hollows. And I'll put the call out to anybody in the room who has evidence that they are using them to please share that with us. We don't really want to be going down the path there of using them to allow offsets for nesting habitat, but we would like it to be able to support population recovery and enhance breeding opportunities for the species. So what are we doing in 2025? We're looking at all the new data that's come in. So Shannon's done an amazing trawl of data from places like bird data, from places like WildNet that's managed by the Queensland government. We've looked at iNaturalist data. We've grabbed information from eBird. We've asked our local government partners if they've got map data resources to share that with us as well. So based on that, we filtered that to make sure we've got high precision feed tree or nest tree or bird records to be able to intersect that over the regional ecosystem mapping. We've grown the regional ecosystem mapping a little bit as well, or the identified regional ecosystems, I should say, by the addition of 4 feed tree species that's been identified through research and community observations. So the ones that are underlined there are the new additions to the species list that's included in the taxon profile that underpins the mapping. So we already had as preferred food trees Alocasuarina inifloia, littoralis, torullosa, and Casuarina cristata and equisetifolia, and we've added to that Alocasuarina lumini and Alocasuarina rigida. We've added in some occasional feed trees. These were not included in the previous mapping, but we've included forests that have Casuarina cunninghamiana, the river sheoak, and Casuarina glauca, the swamp sheoak, because particularly following the 2019-2025s, there was increased records of birds using both those species, and also in the drought preceding that as well. So it's basically saying any port in a storm, they will eat those resources. It's not their preferred, it's not the best food resource for them. But when you're hungry, you need to survive, or you've got young you're trying to feed, then that's what you've got to do. We now have, through that process, identified around about 155. As I said, we're still drafting this and getting the expert panel to sign off on this, but we've got about 155 regional ecosystems identified that we know contain those species. And we know that based on the regional ecosystem description database or the technical description for the regional ecosystem. It's also likely we could have missed some. So being a subcanopy species, the regional ecosystem description database usually identifies, the identifiers for a regional ecosystem are based on the canopy species, not the subcanopy. So we don't necessarily pick up all REs, as they're called, based on that have casuarinas based on that description database. The technical descriptions that the Queensland Herbarium has developed for some regional ecosystems provide a lot more information on species and abundance and presence in the different strata of a regional ecosystem, but we don't have technical descriptions for all the regional ecosystems that we think that we think glossies, or we know glossies use. Anyway. The other changes we've made, we've added regrowth. So as I mentioned before, glossies will feed in, are known to have fed in trees that are only about 5 years old. We know that it's more likely that a 10-year-old tree will provide good food resources. We have access in Queensland to mapping for high value regrowth, which is actually 15-year-old regrowth. And we are using that and intersecting that with the pre-clearing occurrence of the regional ecosystems that we've identified that glossies could use to identify high value regrowth that could be of importance to glossies. We'd really like to be able to take that down from the 15-year high value regrowth mapping that the Queensland government has done to 10-year-old, but that takes a lot more time to do the verification and QA processes on SLATS data to be able to recreate that layer. And we actually only have a short-term window with this project to do that. So we'll work with the high value, the existing mapping, the QA mapping that's already been used by Queensland government in decision-making and legislative processes. So we're using that with a glossy regional ecosystem overlay, so to speak, with it. We've also added general habitat, and that general habitat is remnant vegetation that has the occasional feed trees that I mentioned just before, which is Cunninghammiana and Glauca. We're adding a waterhole overlay. We've had quite some significant information come to us from the community about the importance of a few areas of the landscape that provide water for, on many occasions, several glossy black cockatoos. So trying to protect those water holes where we can by putting a 1,000 metre buffer around those. We mentioned before that we revised the DBH for nesting trees to 40 centimetres. It's likely the confidence rules that we used before to define what's core habitat and what's non-core will remain the same, but that's to be confirmed with the expert panel. And similarly, the definition of core habitat is likely to remain the same, but again, that's for the expert panel to confirm. The other important thing that it did, this new data, is it meant that some of the landscapes that we'd previously identified as potential habitat for glossy are now coming up as known habitat based on species data. So the two sort of mapping images on the sort of bottom left and the center there show an area in the city of Logan where we've seen the change or anticipated change between what we mapped in 2015 or 16 and what we're mapping now based on data. You can see that the extent of dark purple has significantly increased, and you can also see that the number of records of glossies has significantly increased. So this is based on known use of feed trees, known use of particular regional ecosystem, and intersected by confidence the species is using those areas. So this is what it's looking like at the moment for the region. We aim to finalise this in November, so we can wrap up the grant with WISE by early December. We will be submitting the mapping to the Queensland Government, the Department of Environment, Tourism, Science and Information for innovation, I should say, to consider for a matter of state environment significance with our recommendations for core habitat. There's no guarantees the government will accept it, but that's what we're putting forward. And that's why we're sort of keeping the rules fairly similar to what they have been in the past in terms of the confidence ratings, just to smooth some of that process moving forward. But it is dependent on our expert panel. They're the ones who may end up standing up in a court of law defending it. So they need to be confident that what we're putting through to the Queensland Government is something they're able to do that on. MSCS, as I said, is only that core habitat layer, which is those dark purples that are showing up there. Again, no, I don't have nesting data on there. We do actually have more information on nesting trees than we did in 2015, but still only a handful really across the bioregion. We don't know much about nesting. We know a lot more about their feeding habitats. And our intent is also to make the information available publicly through the Conservancy, probably potentially through the website. We'll work out the exact mechanisms there, because we want this information to be used to guide citizen science, to guide research, to guide local government planning and engagement, and also improve our knowledge of what's happening with glossies across the bioregion. So in terms of mapping glossy habitats outside Queensland, so outside of SEQ, we've been advocating to adapt what we've done. So we've got a mechanism in Queensland. We've got a means of developing habitat mapping, a means of including that in state legislation and providing guidance there. So we can duplicate what we've done in SEQ potentially in other areas of Queensland. We can do that data trawl for where we've got glossy records and feed tree records, do those regional or local workshops on feed tree species and vegetation communities or regional ecosystems in Queensland, other vegetation types outside of that, and then refine our mapping and our confidence level. I'm really keen to see if we can advocate, certainly in Queensland, for adapting the process for other species, and similarly for other states. I'm less familiar with the mechanisms that you have available to you under your different legislation to be able to do that and how that process really works. What we're trying to do here is just say, We believe that the habitat mapping in SEQ that we've undertaken has potentially reduced the impact on glossy habitats. It's likely that if there was an impact, and that's a worst case scenario, but it would have been offset or tried to be mitigated, at least when telling people this habitat exists and it's easily accessible through state government mapping processes. In Queensland, we are challenged a little bit with the fact that a matter of local environment significance cannot be substantially the same as a matter of state environment significance. You can't sort of double up. Similarly, I think it works at the MNS, the national level. You can't offset, I guess, the same thing at multiple levels of government. You have to be looking for other values and other reasons to very, I won't say fortunate, but we know that she oak forests contain enormous amount of value for multiple other species, such as food resources for finches and rosellas. In terms of the seed, we also know that the flowers of she oaks provide nectar and pollen for insects and birds, as well as a host for multiple species of mistletoe, which also increases their importance. Fabulous shelter trees as well. I was out just the other day and saw a python curled up underneath it, sheltering from some noisy miners and that. On the subject of noisy miners, they're a key threatening process under the EPBC Act, and identified in that as a mitigation option against noisy miners is the maintenance of she oaks in forest systems, that structural diversity and complexity that puts noisy miners off complete colonization of an area. So she oaks have enormous value. Again, the leaf litter as well. I had somebody telling me a story just the other day about the native, the marsupial mice and rats that they have living in amongst those pine needles. I shouldn't call them pine needles, but in amongst the needles. We also would like local governments, for example, to be able, they can't use it as a MSES, but it can also be used to target private land extension and conservation programs to support their reserve acquisition and support management of existing reserves. If they know they've got glossies in there, there's a relationship obviously between she oak regeneration and fire. So how you manage fire, both for managing your she oak forest, but also reducing impact on hollow bearing trees. Also to support our citizen science. We've used this information in past years to guide people to areas where we think that there's glossy habitat, but we want them to check it out as part of the Great Glossy Count and other citizen science programs. We're using it to also raise community awareness. And potential for for offsets delivery. Obviously, we'd rather not go down that path. We'd rather do the whole avoid process, but if worst comes to worst, then, guiding where those opportunities may exist in the landscape. And that's probably all I'm going to say. I'd really like to hear any questions. I'll just give some thank yous to both the Glossy Black Conservancy and WIRES for engaging Shannon and I to work on this habitat mapping. It's a real privilege to be able to be back in this space and see if we can take another step forward for glossies and put another weapon in the toolbox, so to speak, to try and protect their habitats. There's a link up there for access to the habitat mapping. It's not got much there at the moment, but just keep an eye on it in the future. Reach out to the Conservancy, sign up for the newsletter, and you'll find out when the project's finished and when you can access the information that's coming out of this project. And it's just a big shout out to WIRES, the members of the Conservancy's Research and Science Working Group, the many thousands of citizen scientists, actually not just in SEQ that supported this one, but we know that they're working really hard in all states where we've got glossies to support glossy conservation. So thousands of people working in the community and collecting data. We've had fantastic support from the Queensland government, the staff and provision of data to support this project. And a big shout out to Shannon, who's sitting quietly online somewhere, but might jump in a minute. Who's done all the GIS analysis on here. I'm just talking about all the hard work he's been doing. And we're hoping to finish this up by the end of the year. So I might stop talking then and open up the floor to any questions we may have.
Thanks, Liz.
Yeah, good.
Yep, thank you, Liz. Yes, if
Nice.
anyone's got any questions, it's just a small group, so feel free to raise your Zoom hand or drop something in the chat or just shout out while people are pondering those questions. Liz mentioned that currently we have no knowledge of any glossy black cockatoos using artificial nesting structures or hollows on the mainland. So we are currently trying to collect as much data as we can about any trials that have taken place or any installations that have happened. So I've popped a link in the chat. Jill, you've got your hand up.
Thank you. That was really good, really interesting. I might have missed it at the start. Could you remind me how you defined core habitat?
Yep, so core habitat is, I can probably go back to the slide. There it is. So core habitat is in that pink box, if my screen's still sharing. So the regional ecosystems that we identified, it says in Rule 3, they're all listed in the taxon profile, which is that document I referred to, that it's less than 500 meters proximity to a high precision record. So so it's basically if the high precision record intersects or is within proximity, and we select in that space, it's not a buffered point approach. We select the entire regional ecosystem polygon that arises from that intersect. So it's basically saying that is all mapped as glossy habitat. So whilst the record was here, anywhere in that polygon is considered to be that high precision, that core habitat. Does that help?
And yes, thank you. And how did you determine high precision?
That's the post 1990, so there's a date limit on it. How old is the record? So 1990 would be the oldest record, and less than 500 meter precision on the accuracy. So, standing on the roadside, seeing a bird, a couple of kilometers away is not going to cut it in that space. We need to have confidence on that. And because we did this in 2015, back then, and feel free to jump in here, Shannon, if I get this to add value here. When we did that, the QA on the data back then, it was quite an onerous job. There was lots of old data to go through that didn't have the precision that we needed. We used a lot of that back then as background data, just as a bit of a sounding board, so to speak, on the high precision one. So you might have a cluster of low precision records in an area, but you might have a couple of high, and that gives you that extra confidence. But we didn't rely on those low precision data to do any of the mapping work. So a lot of that filtering was done back then in 2015, and more recently with the tools we've got, like you can just take a photo of an ord on your phone, upload it to iNaturalist, and there you go. Amazing. Or you submit it to eBird or Bird Data or whatever. Do you want to add anything there, Shannon, on the QA process we did?
Yeah, no, that's good, Liz. I think it's those older records where that 500 meter proximity was really applied. As you say, these days we've got smartphones and better accuracy on our records. So you could bring that right down to 100 meters, 200 meters. It may not really change how much habitat's being pulled into that map, I guess. So 500 was sort of what we've run with.
Yeah, and I know for other habitat mapping the Queensland government has done, they don't have that. Like I think for some of the brush tail rock wallaby mapping that the Queensland government has done, they consider 1,000 meter buffer on a record. So again, it's something to do with the mobility of the species, the ability to even get records on those species as well. And we would have done some filtering back on the day. We did mapping for macadamias and beronias and things like that as well back in the day. But again, understanding you might have a record that's on the edge of two different regional ecosystems, and it could be the location accuracy, even if it's 50 meters, could still be saying it's in one regional ecosystem versus another, which is where the expert panel came in. We're like, hey, these seem a bit odd. And then we check the mapping out and go, oh, okay, it's adjoining that regional ecosystem. So we'll drop it out of this one based on that expert knowledge. So the data is one thing, but having experts in the room to help validate the inclusion was important too.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions for Liz or Shannon? Couple of questions in the chat, actually, Liz. Mike's just asked, to what extent would you say the state government is focusing on Glossy Black-Cockatoos as an iconic species they need to protect and restore? It's a good species to use as a lever to influence government decisions on restoring habitat.
Oh, look, it would be amazing to think that they were. I'm not sure that they are at all. So, I mean, this process to drive the habitat mapping is entirely based on the Conservancy and us working together. So it wasn't initiated by the Queensland government. Are they using glossies as an iconic species? I know glossies have been used as an iconic species by lots of organisations across Australia, particularly since the 2019-2020 fires. And to a certain extent, it's appropriate they are, right? So with their hollow-dependent species, they're by protecting glossies and their nesting hollows, we're protecting nesting hollows for, 40, 50 other species that we know rely on those hollows as well. The amazing diversity of species that occur in those she oak forests as well, incredible to be able to support them with glossies. So as a flagship species, an amazing one to be able to allow for a wide diversity of forest types, whether that's from our coastal spaces with the equicetifolia, in those sandy duney kind of countries, through to our heathland she oaks, through to our far west, our bull oaks and Balar. So there's the she oaks that glossies feed on occur in such a diversity of different habitats in different parts, and their use depends on where they are in the landscape. So they are a really good flagship. I'm interested in your comment there about whether the state government, I don't know whether you're suggesting that because you've heard something in that space, or whether we should be pushing it more in that space.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I don't think the state government has used the Glossy Black-Cockatoo too much as one of their flagship species, although Shannon said it has been used in imagery to promote tourism, come to Queensland, see Glossy Black-Cockatoo. Very, very much the Queensland government is very much still heavily investing in koalas as their flagship species, and it is a Conservative LNP government in Queensland again, so they do tend to take that safe route. I interrupted someone then though. Was that you, Mike, or was that Shannon?
Yeah, I was just going to answer the question of kind of why am I asking this?
Yep.
So I'm in an organisation on Bribie Island, and a good percentage of the island. Beeper, yeah.
Yeah.
we call it Beeper. And a big percentage of the island is covered with state forests, which is HQ plantations. And we're kind of looking for levers to get them off the island, frankly. And we've got no koalas. So any kind of species like this that could, if we could say that, Bribie could be a sanctuary for Glossy Black-Cockatoos, because there's loads of she oaks already on the island. There's habitat in the south part. So
I think what we need to do there, I think Darren and I were talking about this on Sunday, Darren, weren't we, up at Kakadu Beach? Anyway, I don't know that there's records of glossies. Shannon will tell me in a second whether we've got records of glossies from Bribie at all. The habitat is mapped, but I'm not sure whether we've got data there. So the southern end we would have picked up. I can see that on the map. You can probably see it now because I just flicked back to it. There is some mapping there at the bottom there, which suggests that we've got glossies. It's dark purple, so there must be some records there. So,
but yeah, it says core habitat.
But the northern end, I mean, we know that they're not going to be in those pine plantations that don't eat pines.
Oh yeah, the point is that if they're in the south, if we restored the north, they would move in, right?
Wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be great? Yeah. Totally support the let's take pine plantations and replace it with native forests. Go for it.
Mike, I was just going to extend an offer to connect. I can tell you a little bit more about the work of the Conservancy and how BEPA might like to join and participate in some of the community activities we're doing. So we'd love to work with you on that. And Jill, you've got your hand up again.
Yeah, sorry. I also, you mentioned offsetting, and obviously you're not keen on it, and no one's keen on it really. But I wondered for glossies what that looked like. Over here, it's a lot of land purchase, but does something else happen for glossies?
In terms of how do the state agencies offset habitat?
Yeah, well, not necessarily habitat only, but other offsetting practices. Like we have indirect offsets over here of 10%. Would be nice if it were more, and we try and get some research activities out of that. But other than doing that sort of thing, there's replanting and weed removal and those sorts of things. I just wondered, and once upon a time it was sticking up nest hollows everywhere, which for our species over here we've discovered is a particularly bad idea. But
yeah, look, I don't know that I've got the detail that you're after on that one, Jill, but I know that there is a multiplier that the state government uses to basically work out X hectares that it's lost, therefore X hectares that needs to be restored. To my mind, though, the huge thing is we've already got a vulnerable species, right? Any loss of its habitat is going to be detrimental to it. It's already in decline. So we shouldn't be offsetting any of its habitat. And if we offset any habitat, we should be making sure that any areas that we're thinking we can regrow and provide it, have regrown and are providing habitat before we lose any more. Well, I mean, to me, it's kind of crazy when you've got a species that's vulnerable to keep taking away its habitat and expecting the population to recover. Like, it's just not going to happen. Right?
So offsetting there is replanting or rehabbing?
Yeah.
Not just standard straight out land purchase.
Look, I think there are some areas where they would be identifying offset opportunities where they could purchase land that has that habitat. But when you put an ecologist's head on, if that land already has habitat, you're not actually getting any more habitat from it. You've already, like glossies will use single trees in parks. They will use regrowth habitat. They will use remnant habitat. If you've got any of that in a space and it's usable by glossies, they will be in there and they'll be using it. So it's not actually offsetting anything that you take away because they're already in there using it. So it doesn't actually make sense to think that we can do this and have a species recover.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Caveat, my personal opinion. No, I think it's reasonable. I mean, again, you've got these species that are vulnerable and we keep taking things away from them, and we can go, actually, you've got that over there. It's this context that if habitat is suitable for a species, they're already using it. Right? If they're not using it, there's a reason why, and maybe we can change that. But if they're already using it, taking it away from another area is not it's not offsetting because they're already in there. They're a mobile species. They're already tripping around the countryside trying to find the she oaks with the species that have got the fruit at the right stage of ripeness to eat them wherever they can, whenever they can. They're already doing that. So it doesn't, offsets don't make space. Don't make sense. So particularly for this species. Anyway.
I guess
Any
that's
more
why
questions?
I think we focused on the regrowth. That was we've tried to build on that previous work and the regrowth. We need to keep building, edge sealing, buffering existing habitat because we know it's not enough to support, the population of glossies that we've got. So yeah, we need to just keep growing habitat because we know there's more losses coming. Certainly for us in Southeast Queensland, one of the fastest growing regions across the nation. We've got the Olympics coming. We're really fast tracking development on all fronts. So yeah, at the same time, we're trying to grow habitat, and our only chance is through regrowth, I guess, natural recovery, as opposed to we'd love to plant more trees, but that's hardjacker.
Yeah, but you're right, Shannon. I mean, but planting a fodder forest or something like that for glossies in a landscape that's currently completely clear of any she oaks will eventually provide more food for them. But will it? I mean, it's going to take 10 years potentially for that to happen. And in the meantime, are we stopping what we're doing? So yeah, Harry. You're on mute.
Yeah, sorry, just
Oh, yeah, there
figuring
you
that out. Yeah, there is a real role for restoration and re-veg to start, like we're way behind the 8 ball, but connecting up all the fragments because it's so fragmented everywhere. So while there are existing stands of healthy core habitat, we've got to then join up to the next, stand that's over there. And, with 10 years, I mean, down here, Littoralis will fruit within about 5 years. They're a little faster growing, but only in the areas that Littoralis occur. But there is a lot of interest in re-veg for glossy habitat and the other species that depend on the same vegetation type. And I think whilst it's slightly separate to the offsetting discussion, it's a really vital one that we can start making up some ground with a lot more people getting involved. And coming from a land care perspective, yeah, land carers are just going nuts for where can they, getting their knowledge up on the species of Alocasuarina and Casuarina, where they grow, what they need, and then how they can help by piecing together the landscape for glossy habitat.
Yeah, absolutely, Harry. And sorry, I didn't mean in any way, shape, or form to say let's not plant trees, because I do that most weekends, and with our catchment group down here, we're doing that. But it's understanding that there's a lot of effort. I mean, even 10,000 a hectare, we've already lost $960 million just to replace what we've got.
And it's expensive,
so, it's expensive
because you've got to maintain it for years before you're going to have a healthy looking. I get it.
Absolutely. So we do need more trees in the landscape for glossies and everything, and we need to keep doing that because the loss is ongoing. All I'm trying to encourage here is that we should be pushing back against offsets as much as we can.
Yeah, agree.
Really, we can't do that for nests. We've got no means of mitigating. And we had this question, didn't we, Sam, on Tuesday, what do we do with a consultant who was saying he's being pushed to put in nest hollows for glossies, and I'm like, well, there's no evidence on the mainland that they're going to use them. So push back harder to say, let's keep our hollow bearing trees.
Yeah, protect what we've got.
Yep.
I'm going to have to dash, everyone, but thank you so much, Liz and Shannon, Sam, and all the recovery team for everything you're doing. Love it.
Thanks, Harry.
Thanks, Harry. Good to have you on board.
All right, take care.
Appreciate anyone else that needs to duck off as well. Any other questions, pop your hand up or drop something in the chat. I'm just going to put that link for the data capture we're doing around artificial nesting as well. That survey is actually being run by the Conservancy on behalf of the recovery team. It's pretty much mostly the same people anyway. I also wanted to let you all know that Glossy Black Conservancy will be running the Great Glossy Count. So BirdLife had no longer have funds to run that national count. So we have taken that on board. We're also not funded, but we are a much smaller organisation. So we will be running the National Great Glossy Count in May next year. And we will also be holding a national forum again. So we last did that in November 2024, and we will do that again in November 2026. Great opportunity to present any outcomes from the RERI research project. Jill and Elizabeth, who are online as well. Are there any other questions?
I was just going to mention, I know we've got a couple of folk online from BEPA. We've had some good support from City of Moreton Bay for running some workshops next year called Glossy Guardians workshops. Can't remember what they're called. Yeah. So there'll be some workshops there next. So again, having that support from local governments to be able to support a bit of awareness and encourage people to look out for glossies, plant their habitat, look after their habitat. So there'll be 3 of them happening in City of Moreton Bay about I think it's around about March, May next year before the Great Glossy Count.
Yeah. Thanks, Liz. Any other questions? Well, I think this brings this workshop to a close 30 minutes early, which is fabulous. Never in the history of nighttime workshops has anybody complained about something finishing early. Huge thank you, Liz and Shannon, our spatial ecologists, for doing this work on behalf of the Conservancy. Obviously, it will reach a lot more people than just the members of the Conservancy. Thank you to all of you for giving up your Thursday evening for coming along to a workshop on habitat mapping. Great to connect with some new people. Membership of the Conservancy is open to anybody. We're a very loose group of people who are just passionate about this species. And
Loose.
please, loose, you, like my son would say. So feel free to connect with Liz or myself. Shannon's not a member of the Conservancy, but he may as well be. I'll just add him to the membership list. So reach out to any of us if we can connect you with other people in other states or in Southeast Queensland in particular. And keep an eye on that habitat mapping page. We will send the link to this workshop out very soon. And yeah, you'll be able to access a bunch of other resources on that habitat mapping page in the next month or so. So thanks, everybody.
Yeah, and if you're at AOC, we'll have a poster up there too.
Thank you, Liz.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Nice to see you
Great to see you.
all. Bye.
Thank you so much.
Bye.